Welcome to Lynn Cullen Live. Talk radio without the static. Email your questions and comments to lynncullenshow@gmail.com. And now your host, Lynn Cullen.
And a good morning to one and all. This is our last program together for a week. And I have to tell you that when I awoke this morning and immersed myself, it's not healthy. You wake up and the first thing you do is start, it's the first thing I do. I got to go to work. So I start reading. And oh my God, it's a good thing I'm taking next week off because I just found myself almost incapable of reading anything. I mean, I was reading headlines and the headlines were making me crazy. So I definitely need a break, I think. God. And I know I'm not alone. I saw a friend last night who I haven't seen in some time, and we start talking. When we're with people who you haven't spoken to for a long time, I mean, you end up, all these things, all these worries come up, and yeah, no getting away. I sometimes marvel at apparently most people who are disinterested, most people, they live their lives and they pay no attention to what's going on in the news, in their government. I can't imagine living like that. And I think it's most people. Wow. I mean, what worries me is then some of those people vote. And you wonder on what basis they're voting, at what level of just ignorance. Oh, well, okay. I want to begin with, I was heartened to come upon a Nicholas Kristof column in today's New York Times. He has been, from the beginning of the war in Gaza, has been just appalled by Israel's, what do you call it? The way they're doing the war. What do you call that? What's the verb? Anyway, just appalled. And I mean, he's been all over Biden for supporting it, and it's been very hard for me to read some of his columns because I really appreciate his point of view, and he's just been unequivocating in his just, oh boy, I didn't think I slept well last night. Words are not coming. Denunciation, in his denunciation of how Israel is responding to the horror of October 7th. Anyway, I was so glad today that he wrote a column that essentially says what I was saying and have been saying all week and yesterday, that these protests by these students are not helpful. They're not helpful to the Gazans. They're not helping them. They're acting out, the students are, and they're having, as I said, I know because I was one, a hell of a time. It's heady stuff. But they're not. They're in. It's sort of like Republicans in the Congress. They're just putting on a show. It does not help. And coming from me, I think that is suspect. I suspect uh, because I am very pro-Israel. But coming from Kristof, it holds a lot of weight. And as I read his column, I was so hoping that these kids, and they're not kids, these young adults, would listen because they know that he shares their point of view about the war. And he really wrote this as a letter to them. His column starts student protesters, colon. He's talking specifically to them. And he starts out by saying that he admires their concern for the Gazans and their intention to make a difference. But then, if I may, he says this, and he says it more elegantly than I've been saying it, but it's exactly what I've been saying. He says, I worry about how peaceful protests have tipped into occupations of buildings, risks to commencements, and what I see as undue tolerance of anti Semitism, chaos, vandalism, and extremism. I'm afraid that the more aggressive actions may be hurting the Gazans you are trying to help. And then, because he is of a certain age too, he says, I'm shaped in my thinking by the Vietnam War protests of the 1960s. Students who protested then were right on the merits. The war was unwinnable and conducted in ways that were reckless and immoral. Yet those students did not shorten that terrible war. Instead, they probably prolonged it. Leftist activists in 1968 didn't achieve their goal of electing the peace candidate, Gene McCarthy. I mean, this is all such ancient history to these kids, but many of you, and certainly I, lived it. McCarthy didn't get the nomination. We were in the streets. We were closing down schools and well, we weren't closing them down, but we were taking them over. And the turmoil and the protests at the convention undoubtedly helped elect Richard Nixon, who then dragged the war out and expanded it into Cambodia. So again, history, relatively recent history. And we're seeing these kids do the same thing. And he says good intentions are not enough. Empathy is not enough. It's outcomes that matter. And he tells these students, you have to ask yourselves, are these encampments and the arrests that have happened, closing in on 2,000 students arrested around the country, students expelled, suspended, how is that helping the Palestinians? He asks. He says, after all, what are we talking about now? We're talking about you. We're talking about the students. You got the spotlight, the media attention, and you've taken it away from the suffering Gazans. And he points out humility, which is certainly in short supply at that age. He says humility is an essential tool in persuasion. The challenge is to take an unflinching moral stance while acknowledging that you may eventually be proved wrong. Holding on to that contradiction can curb the tendency towards self-righteousness, which God knows has been on display, and the impulse to shout others down. Self-righteousness and shouting persuade nobody, ever. And then he points out some of the things I have also pointed out, that protesters have taken public space and saying they're liberating it. If it's public space, it's already liberated. They're not liberating it. In fact, they are taking it over and are not allowing people with different viewpoints to even step onto it. And he says, it strikes me as ironic that one of the principles you supposedly stand for is that you have zero tolerance for discrimination of any sort. But apparently that doesn't apply to Jews or others who disagree with them. And then he reminds them something which they seemingly have forgotten. And let's acknowledge that Hamas is a misogynistic, homophobic, anti-Semitic terrorist organization that is currently holding American hostages, Israeli hostages. And he goes on to school these pro-Hamas kids. Hamas has been a catastrophe for the people of Gaza. And it's hard for me to see why anyone supporting Palestinians would support Hamas. Exactly what I said yesterday. And then he goes on to say their demands for divestment will not help the Gazans. They won't, and it won't hurt Netanyahu. It may hurt the endowments of the universities they go to, which means maybe the universities will have to have higher tuition or give less student aid to students who can't afford an education. And then he tells them, you want to do something? Raise funds, raise money for organizations that are actually actively helping the people of Gaza, as opposed to your play acting. Well, I'll tell you, I was really happy to see that, because I sometimes feel like I'm a voice in the wilderness, or perceived as some kind of like a right winger or something. No one can say that of Nicholas Kristof, and he is appalled. It occurs to me that young people never listen to us old people. It is a rare young person, isn't it, who will listen to what their elders have to say. And I would argue that it's probably true the other way around, that too few adults really listen to what young people are trying to tell them. And you just wish they would listen, because they're causing a lot of damage. And as I have said, and they're not helping, I have said they could also help reelect Donald Trump, as we 60s activists helped put Richard Nixon in the White House and ended up actually prolonging the war we were trying to end. Yeah. I saw you can't make this stuff up. Um, at Columbia, when they took over, this is before they were rousted out. And I want to get to that. The administrations of these schools, generally speaking, have been so ham fisted and stupid beyond belief. It's like these are the elite universities of this country, and these are the elite students in them. Good God. I'm appalled by both the administrators and their students. Just appalled. When the New York City police went into Columbia, AOC, Congresswoman, said, let me see if I can find this. Here it is. She tweeted this. If any kid is hurt tonight, responsibility will fall on the mayor and university presidents. Other leaders in schools have found a safe, de-escalatory path. This is the opposite of leadership and endangers public safety, a nightmare in the making. That's what she said. First of all, I want to say, and I have made the mistake, she calls them kids. I have called them kids. They're not kids. They're adults. They're young adults. And they are the same age as the other kids we send off to fight our wars, to risk death. And here's something that you can't make up. When they took over that building in Columbia, um, they finally, these kids, here I go again. Well, these young people have refused to speak to media much. And yet they called a press conference once they had taken over this building. And they were demanding many things. But one of the things they were demanding was that the university, one of whose buildings they had vandalized and taken over, bring them food, provide them with food. You can't make this up. In fact, a reporter who heard this demand asked the spokesperson. It was a woman named Johanna King Slutsky. And Slutsky was asked by the reporter, why should the university be obligated to provide food for you who've taken over their building? And here's the response. I read it to you. Well, I guess it's a question of what kind of community and obligation Columbia feels it has to its students. Do you want students to die of dehydration and starvation or get severely ill if they disagree with you? If the answer is no, then you should allow basic. I mean, it's crazy to say because we're on an Ivy League campus, but this is like basic humanitarian aid we are asking for. Could like people please just have a glass of water? Even I don't know where to start. Talk about play acting. These idiots think that they are in need of humanitarian aid. These privileged, elitist kids, children. Good God. And what are they doing? They're comparing themselves to the Gazans. These, who really are in need of fresh water, who really are starving. And they have the gall to call for humanitarian aid to themselves? You can't make it up. Hmm. Okay, so what I mentioned that I thought that the universities, the administrators, are showing themselves to be just hapless, clueless. And a great piece today in the Atlantic. I know they should give me a free subscription for all the touting I do of the Atlantic. But, and I don't know if I can, it's rather lengthy, so I don't know. But the gist of it is that these very universities spent years and years building up a reputation for making students into activists. They encourage activism. And the article, I mean, if you think I'm, overstating that, I mean, the article talks about a number of these universities that actually brand themselves in this way. They're looking for these activist, left-oriented students. And Cornell was one that gets a shout out because they talk about one student who went to Cornell because of its history of campus radicalism. In his application, which they certainly accepted, he wrote about his involvement with Democratic Socialists of America and how he wanted to learn how to do more militant protest. And, Cornell said, oh, yeah, this is the kind of kid we want. In fact, Cornell romanticizes the fact that in the 60s, their students took over the campus. The school shows a documentary about the occupation called Agents of Change. The Cornell's media relations department has run a number of articles honoring the anniversaries of, actually they had a year-long celebration on the 50th anniversary of the takeover. What's fascinating is how they've responded to this takeover. I believe this particular student who they so happily brought in is now has been suspended. And what the universities, they were in a race, these elite universities, to outpace one another in appealing in this way. They hired faculty in this way and students, and now they're shocked. So Cornell just one of so many universities that for their brand, they champion their legacy of student activism. But they brought the hammer down on the students now. They call the cops. And in some ways, again, you can't make this stuff up. If this leads to a reckoning, now I see why the Republicans are just glomming onto this, because it plays into their agenda of taking down, the woke universities. But in some respects, I mean, the woke universities have brought this all on themselves and have subjected us all to, well, all the stuff that I'm rebelling against, the stuff that has pulled me away from the left, because they just keep moving further and further and further away from a reasonable place where most people are. I saw a great tweet. Let me find it for you. Um, Here's what it says. I increasingly believe that this election will be a referendum on whether anything matters anymore. He goes on. There's no rational case for Trump, but there's a loud contingent on the left that just wants to burn it all down. Combine that with low information voters and Republicans circling the wagons around their guy, and you have the outlines of a calamity. Hopefully, people wake up. I think he's done a pretty good, summation. Because that's my feeling exactly. This will be a referendum on whether we've lost our frigging minds or if anything really matters anymore, or we're just too attached to staying in our where we are and screaming at each other. God. Okay, I need a lift. Obituary! Time for an obit when I need a lift. And this one, I don't remember this at all. Well, I guess I was too young. It involves a woman, an Olympic champion, who died at the age of 91. And her name was Olga Fikatova Connolly. And the name has a lot that tells you somewhat of the story. She was an Olympic athlete, a discus thrower for Czechoslovakia at the 1956 games, I believe in Melbourne. And I'm looking at a picture of her on the winners podium with two Russians on either side of her, and she's beautiful. She's this beautiful young woman. She was, I think, 24 years old, and she won gold for Czechoslovakia. But this was during the Cold War, because that becomes important. She had met someone just a few days earlier who was on another team. He was looking for some equipment. He did hammer throw. Is that what they call that? Hammer? And so both of them were throwers. He threw hammers, she threw discuses. And they met in some shed where there was equipment. And they fell in love. Bang, like that. He was on the American team. So they fell in love and they got married. And it was a huge story at the time. The New York Times in 1972, which is much later, did some kind of a story on this Olympic romance. And they said this. So he went to an equipment shed one morning in the Olympic Village to check out a hammer for practice. Well, I guess I just told you all this. And an attractive woman discus thrower from Czechoslovakia named Olga happened to be in the shed at the same time. 4 months later, they were married. But that 4 months created all kinds of trouble because officials in Czechoslovakia's communist government refused to allow her marriage. And I don't know what kind of things got pulled or what kind of pressure got put on, but the president of the country ended up stepping in and giving them the go-ahead. And she remembers, she says this, they were telling me I was a traitor and that I was running around with an American fascist. They planned a tiny wedding in Prague, but word got out and a crowd estimated at 30,000 people showed up outside the courthouse where they took their vows because they had become they were the hottest couple in the world. I never gave his name. His name is something Connolly because her name is now Olga Connolly. And they settled in Southern California, and she became an American citizen, and she went on to compete for the United States as a discus thrower in 4 Olympics: Rome, Tokyo, Mexico City, and Munich. She was, because they were like real celebrities, they were also, she was one of the, remember that old show, To Tell the Truth, the TV show, where a mystery guest would come out and the panelists, I'm remembering Bennett Cerf, Arlene Francis, Dorothy Kilgallen. Is that the show? I loved that show. They would, through questioning of this mystery guest, try to figure out who they were. So she was on the show in 1958. I don't know if they guessed her. And the two of them appeared on the Ed Sullivan Show. And Ed gave them a big, big build-up. And then they were serenaded by Louis Armstrong on the Ed Sullivan Show. In 97, when the United States put out a bunch of postage stamps honoring women, she got one. She was on a U.S. postage stamp, which is really hard to do when you're still alive. She carried the American flag in the last Olympics, and she said that was her greatest moment, that she was chosen by the American team to carry the flag. And this was the only thing I read this morning that just made me so happy. And then about paragraph 25 or 30, I read this. The marriage didn't last, however. Damn, it didn't last. It lasted 16 years. They had 4 kids. Oh, man. So, one more thing I'll read you. She told the Baltimore Sun that when her fellow teammates asked her to carry the American flag, the team manager intervened and said she couldn't because of her opposition to the war in Vietnam. And he insisted that they hold another election. So they held another election of who would carry the flag, and, well, she won again. And the guy backed off. It says here to sports historians, however, she'll undoubtedly be remembered foremost for the romance that decades earlier had captured the imaginations of a tense world, breaching the Iron Curtain and becoming front page news. And it ends with this, which is great. The New York Times wrote, after their wedding in 1957, which was international news, the New York Times ended their piece with this. The H-bomb overhangs us like a cloud of doom. The subway during rush hours is almost impossible to endure. But Olga and Harold are in love, and the world does not say no to them. Jeez. That's 1957. So it was possible to go viral in 57 before. It was possible, but it wasn't as easy. Can you imagine in today's world with the tech we have? God. There are so many things I have here that I've been meaning to share with you, and I somehow keep passing them up. So because this is the last show for a week or so, I'm bound and determined to get them in. So it'll be a little bit of a grab bag from here on out. And the odds are, because I've been holding this stuff for so long, that you know all about it anyway. And whatever. Okay, here it is. Uh, Federal judges strike down Louisiana's congressional map. This is the most depressing story ever, and it shows how these Republicans and what Trump has done to the federal courts will continue to have huge impact on Democrats' ability to, like, take back the House, for instance. So what happened is that it had been determined that Louisiana had drawn congressional districts that were intended to, this will come as a shock, I know, intended to de- deplete the power of Louisiana's black citizens from being represented. So that they drew congressional districts where there was only one district in all of Louisiana that ever had a chance of electing a black person, let's say. And some folks, so they redrew, a map was redrawn and they created a second district. Um, it's somewhere I had the numbers of like the percentage of blacks in Louisiana. And I mean, how it's just such an outrageous intent to deprive them. Sure, let them vote, but we're going to gerrymander districts so that there's no way they ever can elect someone who will represent them. That we're only going to send people to Washington who are going to represent white folks. And so a bunch of white folks in Louisiana brought a case against this map that created a second black district. And off it went to a 3-judge federal panel. In a 2-to-1 decision, the two being two Trump appointees, those Trump appointees threw out Louisiana's just drawn, redrawn congressional map that included an additional majority black district, and they did it on racial grounds, saying it was discriminatory toward white folks. And so, as the good people of Louisiana head into this coming election, it's unclear because this is going to be challenged as well. This will go up to the Supreme Court. What do you think their chances are at the Supreme Court? A court also packed by Donald Trump. That is a story that so enraged me. And you still hear people say, well, there's really not that much difference. I can't stand Biden, they say. He's too old, he's this, that, yada, yada, yada. And people don't keep in their minds the power a president has and the power that Donald Trump used to remake the federal judiciary. And these are people who have lifetime tenures. By the way, what he's intending to do if he does get reelected? I gave you a litany yesterday of horror, but I forgot to tell you that he's going to pressure. There's going to be a big pressure campaign to get Clarence Thomas off the court, and I believe Alito as well. Not that they're not voting the way the Republicans want them to vote, but because they're too old and they want those seats to be held by people who will vote like Alito and Thomas, but be like maybe 45 years old. So they'll be there for a half a century. And that's the intent. You probably know this one. Uh, Turns out there's a company here in Pittsburgh. I think it's called Aurora, that has created a 18-wheel tractor trailer big truck that drives itself. Yeah. Now we know they were doing cars here for a long time that drove themselves, and somehow it seems like those driverless cars have pretty much gone off the, this is the wrong metaphor, the rails. But trucks, turns out, have not. So this truck here, made in Pittsburgh, outfitted with 25 laser, radar, camera, sensors, is going to start hauling freight between Dallas and Houston this year. This year. I'm glad it ain't around here. But on Route 45, Interstate 45, between Dallas and Houston, there are going to be 20 driverless trucks later this year. So if you're driving there and there's a truck behind you, that truck might not have a human on board, although it'll have tons and tons and tons of freight. Good God. And Aurora, this Pittsburgh firm, is not the only one doing it, although its 20 trucks are going to be on the road with it's not like here where we had those driverless cars around and there was always like a human sitting in the passenger seat or something. No humans. And they figure that within the next 3 years, there will be thousands of self-driving trucks on the roads. And okay, you truck drivers, you're just one of the many, 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 many folks whose days are limited because, companies would rather have a truck that they don't have to, well, first of all, a truck that can run forever, doesn't have to sleep, only has to get fuel, and back out onto the road it goes. And they say the accident rate will be lower because there won't be humans at the wheel. If anything ever goes wrong with the truck, it knows to immediately pull over to the side. It was involved in one accident that it did not cause. Someone ran into it. It was a human driver that caused it. And the truck did exactly what it was supposed to do. It pulled over and remotely then called for assistance. So I got news for you. Next time you're on the road, that 80,000-pound truck that passes you or comes bearing down on you, there might not be anyone in there. So it says here, yeah, that FedEx is going to use them. Uber Freight is going to use them. God almighty. I don't know. I don't know. I bet it's true that they're safer. They drive a consistent speed. They drive the speed limit. They don't, but there's bound to be accidents. I'm sorry, there's going to be accidents. But there are already. Oh my God. What a world. Okay. And then we got to go to Tennessee. No, we don't. Don't go near the place. Tennessee, and I've talked about this legislature before. This is the one that, threw those, their black representatives actually out. And then they got right back in. Um, this crowd in Tennessee, in their legislature, is what, if MAGA ruled the country, this is the kind of geniuses we would have. And they already are in Congress, these guys. So Tennessee, and again, you probably know this, but Tennessee passed a bill that its response to school shootings, because there was a bad one there at a Christian school in Nashville. And these geniuses' response was more guns, right? So they have signed and the governor will sign it, allowing teachers and other staff members at Tennessee schools to carry concealed handguns. And guess what? Parents will not be notified. And while we're on Tennessee, and this is courtesy of Kurt, who sent it some time ago, and this one makes the gun ruling, look like, again, the work of sober, genius legislators. The Tennessee is also the one, isn't it? Or was that Georgia? That had that passed a bill that airplanes couldn't leave contrails over the state because they think it's really, the contrails are about messing with the weather or something. They don't think, I just, what are we going to do with this level of stupidity? What are we going to do? Why can't I get to this piece? Hang on here. Let me see. This has to do, it won't let me open it? Okay, it will on it. Okay, wait a minute. Okay, a bill that would classify as a drug certain foods with vaccine materials added to them. No, it's not letting me see it. The proposed bill, it would, anyway, no, they won't let me read it. Fuck you. I have to sign up? I'm not signing up. This has to do with, well, damn it. They think lettuce and other food, like produce, has vaccine materials in it. And I guess the Tennessee legislature have they outlawed lettuce? Kurt, I don't know. I can't read it. It won't let me read it. It's behind a paywall. So I can't really, I finally thought I was going to get. When Kurt sent me this, it was titled Vaccine Lettuce. And he said, Tennessee may outlaw something that doesn't even exist. Well, but that's what they've done with the contrails too, or if it's one of those genius states. Wow. Okay, so I didn't mention anything yesterday about Florida and the abortion thing. And speaking of the abortion thing, I'm sure you saw that 2 Republicans actually joined the Democrats in the Arizona Senate and voted to repeal that 1860, whatever the hell law that was about to go into effect, criminalizing abortion. Um, so the thing is that there are quite a few Republicans who are catching on to the fact that this abortion stance that they have is not popular with the people. And in every state where the people get a shot at determining whether or not abortion will be safe and legal, the people say resoundingly, yes. So some Republicans, including these guys who joined with the Democrats, are trying to ameliorate the damage that this abortion issue is having on Republican chances during elections. And Florida is now, some people think, even in play for Biden. I doubt that, because they too have now essentially criminalized abortion. And I don't know if you've seen a map of where you can't get an abortion in this country, but it is a solid now hunk of the American South from Texas east. It's a woman, and I can't even imagine how many women we're talking about who live in those states, who will have to travel to, I guess, the nearest state. Now, Florida was a state that actually Southern women could go to for abortion services. And now Florida's gone. I think the nearest state is Virginia. But this is mind blowing and might save the Democrats. It might save the Democrats, this issue. It's seemingly the only one that seems to have any power, as I become increasingly worried about it. A number of these states will have constitutional amendments on the ballot, but like Florida will. But Florida has a ridiculously high bar. It's not it's not 51%. It's 60% has to support the passage of that amendment, and that's iffy. But I don't know. So abortion is going to be way up there and might save us. The university campuses, not so much. Benjamin Netanyahu, not so much. We got a lot of impediments. And then there was this I read, which I consider good news, and I want to share it with you. This is also from The Atlantic. I really think I'm going to tell them I should get a free subscription. Anyway, readership of the 10 largest right-wing websites. And that's like the Daily Wire, the Daily Caller, the Federalist. Who knew? The 10 largest right-wing websites have seen a 40% drop in clicks. in the last 4 years. Whoa. The Federalist lost 91% of its readership. Well, I assume that means it's dead. The Daily Caller lost 57%. The Daily Wire lost 44%. And then I thought to myself, maybe this isn't good news. Maybe these guys have all moved on to even a more horrific bunch of sort of startup fascist publications. Who the hell knows? Anyway, our time is up. I will be hitting the road. I hope there's no driverless trucks. My God. I'll be hitting the road tomorrow, and I'll be back on what? The 13th? Whatever, a week from Monday is. Okay? Hope you have a good week. I hope we're all still here after it. One can only imagine what's going to be happening. Oh, I just give up. I don't think the Trump trial will be over. Do you? Nah, I don't think so. But what do I know? Anyway, I will be sort of paying attention with one eye sort of open, taking in peripheral content. But that's the most I'm going to do. Although, knowing myself, I'm so addicted that I'll probably be reading every bit as much as I ever did. Anyway, I'll look forward to talking to you again.
Lynn Cullen Live, Monday through Thursday from 10 a.m. to 11 a.m. and archived at pghcitypaper.com. The opinions expressed on Lynn Cullen Live are those of the host and do not necessarily reflect the viewpoints of Pittsburgh City Paper or its advertisers.